Perhaps your background makes it difficult for you to see beyond surface-level identity politics.
The classroom was dead silent except for the sound of paper hitting the floor. 14-year-old Maya Richardson sat frozen at her desk as Mrs. Patricia Hendricks towered over her, holding what was left of Maya's essay between two fingers like it was contaminated. The older woman's perfectly styled gray hair didn't move as she shook her head in theatrical disappointment. Perhaps if you spent less time on your creative writing, and more time understanding basic literature, you wouldn't embarrass yourself like this, Miss Richardson. Maya's carefully written analysis of James Baldwin's "Go Tell It on the Mountain" lay crumpled on the floor. Around her, classmates shifted in their seats. Some looked away. Others smirked. Tyler Bradford, sitting in the front row with his designer watch catching the light, wasn't even trying to hide his grin. Emma Sullivan covered her mouth, but her eyes gleamed with that particular satisfaction people feel when someone else is being destroyed and they're safe. Mrs. Hendricks bent down, picked up the crumpled paper, and smoothed it out just enough to read from it mockingly. Her voice dripped with condescension as she highlighted phrases Maya had labored over, twisting each one into something amateur, something ignorant, something less than. But here's what Mrs. Patricia Hendricks, with her 28 years of tenure and her immaculate reputation at Whitmore Academy, didn't know. What she couldn't possibly know as she stood there humiliating a 14-year-old girl in front of her peers. In exactly 4 hours she would be standing in front of the school board. And Maya's father would be the one asking the questions. Let's rewind and see how we got here. That morning had started like most mornings in the Richardson household. The sun barely creeping through the blinds of their small one-room apartment on the east side of the city. Maya was already awake, sitting cross-legged on her bed with papers spread around her like fallen leaves. She'd been up since 5:30, reviewing her essay one last time, making sure every argument was airtight, every citation perfect. The apartment was modest. One room serving as bedroom, living room, and study. A tiny kitchenette in the corner. But it was clean, organized, loved. Photos covered one wall. Maya as a baby, Maya's first day of school, Maya with both parents before everything changed. In most of them, her mother was smiling, radiant, alive. Marcus Richardson moved quietly through the space, already dressed in his work clothes. Heavy boots, worn jeans, a flannel shirt with his construction company's logo on the pocket. He was a big man, solid, with hands calloused from hard work and eyes that carried a weight most people didn't notice. He kissed the top of Maya's head as he passed. "Morning, baby girl. You been up long?" "Just reviewing my Baldwin essay. We present today." Marcus paused, looking at the papers around her. His daughter had inherited her mother's brilliance, that sharp mind that could take an idea and turn it over until she found truths other people missed. The essay he'd read last night wasn't just good. It was exceptional. Maya had written a critical analysis that challenged the standard interpretation of Baldwin's work, arguing that the novel wasn't just about religious awakening but about the specific psychological weight of being black in America, the ways racism seeps into identity itself. "Your mama would be proud of this one," he said quietly. Maya looked up, and for just a moment, the confident scholar disappeared and she was just a girl who missed her mother. "You think so?" "I know so. Now I got to head out, double shift today." "You got everything you need for school?" "Yes, Dad. Be safe." He squeezed her shoulder and headed for the door, lunch pail in hand. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and Maya was alone with her thoughts and her essay and the leather journal that had belonged to her mother. She picked it up, running her fingers over the worn cover. Inside, her mother's handwriting filled the pages. Lesson plans, reflections on teaching, notes of encouragement she'd written to herself during hard days. Maya's mother had been a teacher at a public school in their neighborhood. She believed that every child deserved to be seen, to be heard, to have their perspective valued. She died 3 years ago, cancer, sudden and merciless, and the loss had reshaped everything. Marcus had fallen apart for a while. Maya never talked about those months, the way her father had disappeared into grief while she learned to cook for herself, to do laundry, to be smaller so he didn't have to worry about her too. But they'd found their way back to each other. And Maya had found her way into Whitmore Academy on a full scholarship, determined to make her mother proud, to prove that brilliance had nothing to do with zip codes or bank accounts. She opened the journal to a page near the end. Her mother's handwriting, slightly shakier now, written just days before she died. "Maya has a gift. Not just intelligence but insight. She sees the world in layers. Never let anyone dim that light." Maya closed the journal, slipped it into her backpack along with her essay and got ready for school. Whitmore Academy sat on 12 acres of manicured grounds in the wealthiest part of the city. The buildings were old money beautiful, brick and ivy, tall windows, oak trees that had been there longer than anyone could remember. Students arrived in luxury cars or were dropped off by drivers. The parking lot looked like a European auto show. Maya got off the city bus 2 blocks away and walked. She'd done this every day for 2 years now, and she still felt that moment of hesitation when the building came into view. This wasn't her world. The other students made sure she knew it, not always with words. Sometimes it was just the way they looked at her. Sometimes it was the conversations that stopped when she walked by. Sometimes it was being one of only 3 black students in the entire school, feeling like a permanent visitor in a space that made it clear she was allowed but not belonging. Jessica Chin was waiting by the front steps, and Maya's shoulders relaxed slightly. Jessica understood. She was one of the other scholarship students, and while her experience was different, her family had money once, lost it in her father's business collapse, fought their way to stability. She knew what it meant to not quite fit. "You ready for today?" Jessica asked, falling into step beside Maya as they headed inside. "I think so. I've gone over the essay 100 times." Jessica's expression shifted, something worried crossing her face. "Maya, about Mrs. Hendricks." "What about her?" "Just, maybe don't push too hard today. You know how she gets with you." Maya stopped walking. They were in the hallway now, students flowing around them like water around stones. "My analysis is solid, Jess. I've cited everything. I've built a real argument." "I know you have. That's not what I'm saying." Jessica lowered her voice. "I'm saying she's not going to like it anyway. You could write the perfect essay and she'd find something wrong with it. So maybe just agree with whatever she says. Get through the class. It's not worth the fight." But Maya shook her head. She'd been doing that all semester. Staying quiet when Mrs. Hendricks dismissed her raised hand. Accepting grades that didn't match the quality of her work. Sitting in the back of the classroom even though she'd mentioned her eyesight issues because Mrs. Hendricks had said all the front seats were reserved for students who needed extra support. And somehow Maya, despite being one of the top students, never qualified. "I can't keep doing that," Maya said. "My mom taught me that my voice matters. That my perspective isn't a limitation." Jessica looked like she wanted to argue more, but the warning bell rang. "Okay. Just be careful." They headed to their lockers. Down the hall, Tyler Bradford was holding court with his usual crowd, the sons and daughters of tech executives, hedge fund managers, old family money. Emma Sullivan hovered at the edge of the group, laughing a beat too late at jokes, desperate to maintain her position in the hierarchy. Tyler noticed Maya and said something to the group. They all looked her way. More laughter. Maya kept walking, head up, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her react. If you're already invested in Maya's story and want to see how this unfolds, hit that subscribe button now because this is just the beginning, and you won't believe where this goes. Mrs. Patricia Hendricks had been teaching at Whitmore Academy for 28 years. She'd started as a young woman fresh out of graduate school, idealistic and energetic, and had gradually transformed into an institution. She knew it. She took pride in it. Her classroom was her kingdom, and she ruled it with exacting standards and an unwavering belief in her own judgment. At 52 she maintained an impeccable appearance. Hair styled weekly at the same salon she'd been going to for 15 years. Clothes classic and expensive, tailored blazers, silk blouses, pearl earrings that had belonged to her mother. She drove a Volvo and lived in a condo overlooking the river and spent her summers in Martha's Vineyard. She'd never married, never had children, and often said her students were her legacy. But that legacy had become complicated in recent years. The school had changed. New administration pushing diversity initiatives, scholarship programs bringing in students who, in Mrs. Hendricks' private opinion, weren't prepared for Whitmore's academic rigor. She'd never say it quite like that in official settings, of course. She'd learned the right language. She talked about maintaining standards, and not lowering the bar, and ensuring all students were truly ready to succeed at this level. The other teachers had started to notice things. The way Mrs. Hendricks called on certain students more than others. The way she praised mediocre work from legacy students while finding fault with exceptional work from scholarship kids. The way she sighed when Maya Richardson raised her hand, like the girl's very participation was exhausting. Mr. Davis, a younger teacher who joined the faculty just 2 years ago, had tried to say something once. It was in the teacher's lounge, Mrs. Hendricks complaining about having to coddle students who clearly weren't ready for her honors English class. He'd mentioned that Maya Richardson's essay on Toni Morrison had been remarkably sophisticated. Mrs. Hendricks had smiled in that way that wasn't really a smile. "Mr. Davis, you're new here, so you don't understand yet. These students need to learn that good grades aren't given out like participation trophies. Maya is a perfect example. Bright enough, certainly, but she tends to let her personal feelings color her academic analysis. I'm trying to teach her intellectual rigor. Mr. Davis had wanted to push back, to point out that he'd read Maya's essays and they were more rigorous than most of what crossed his desk. But he was junior faculty, still on probationary contract, and Mrs. Hendricks had the principal's ear. So he'd said nothing. And he'd felt ashamed about that silence every day since. Throughout the semester the pattern had continued. Maya would raise her hand, and Mrs. Hendricks would look right past her. Maya would turn in an essay and it would come back marked down for tone, or bias, or lack of objectivity, vague critiques that didn't point to actual errors. Mrs. Hendricks had seated Maya in the back row despite Maya mentioning she had trouble seeing the board, saying the front seats were reserved for students who needed extra support. The cruelty was subtle enough to deny, systematic enough to damage. When Maya walked into Mrs. Hendricks' classroom that day, she felt the familiar knot in her stomach. The room was beautiful, tall ceilings, large windows, built-in bookshelves filled with classic literature. Posters on the wall with quotes from Hemingway, Fitzgerald, Austen. Not a single author of color among them, Maya had noticed, though she'd never said anything. Mrs. Hendricks stood at the front of the room, perfectly poised as always. She greeted students as they entered, warm with some, coolly professional with others. When Maya walked in, she received the barest nod of acknowledgement. Maya took her assigned seat in the back. Jessica shot her an encouraging look from across the room. Tyler was already settled in the front, looking supremely confident. Emma sat beside him, notebook open, pen ready, performing the role of dedicated student. The bell rang. Mrs. Hendricks closed the door and turned to face the class. Good morning. Today, as you know, we'll be presenting our analytical essays on James Baldwin's Go Tell It on the Mountain. I'm looking forward to seeing how you've engaged with this complex text. She consulted her notes, though Maya suspected she already knew exactly who she was calling on first. Tyler, let's begin with you. Tyler stood, walked to the front of the room with casual confidence, and began reading his essay. It was competent but generic, hitting all the expected points about religious awakening and family dynamics and the search for identity. He'd clearly read the SparkNotes summary and the introduction to the textbook edition. Nothing original, nothing that suggested he'd actually wrestled with Baldwin's ideas, but nothing technically wrong either. When he finished, Mrs. Hendricks beamed. Excellent work, Tyler. You've really captured the essence of Baldwin's themes. The way you connected John's spiritual crisis to universal questions of belonging, just wonderful. A+. Tyler smirked as he returned to his seat. Maya felt her jaw tighten. That essay would have gotten a C- in her mother's classroom for lack of original analysis. Emma, you're next. Emma's essay was worse. She'd misidentified a major character, confused plot points, and made several claims that directly contradicted the text. But her analysis stayed safely within conventional interpretations, never challenging anything, never asking difficult questions. Mrs. Hendricks listened patiently, even encouragingly. Emma, there are a few small details to polish, but I appreciate your engagement with the text. This shows real growth. B+. Maya's hand went up. Mrs. Hendricks' eyes flicked toward her, then away. Marcus, let's hear from you. Another student presented. Another safe, surface-level analysis. More praise from Mrs. Hendricks. Maya's hand stayed up. Mrs. Hendricks called on 2 more students. Maya's arm was getting tired, but she kept it raised. Around her, classmates started noticing. Jessica looked worried. Tyler looked amused. Finally, with only a few students left, Mrs. Hendricks sighed. The sound was soft but deliberate, loud enough for the front rows to hear. Loud enough to signal her reluctance. Yes, Miss Richardson. I suppose we should hear what you have to say. The words were polite. The tone was anything but. It was the tone you'd use with a persistent child asking the same question for the 10th time. It was the tone that said, this will be a waste of our time, but let's get it over with. Maya stood, gathering her papers. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was steady as she began to read. What do you think Maya should do in this moment? Push forward with her analysis despite Mrs. Hendricks' attitude, or play it safe like Jessica suggested? Let us know in the comments. Maya's voice was steady as she began, but there was something else there too. Passion, the kind that comes from genuinely caring about ideas. She'd spent weeks on this essay not because it was assigned, but because Baldwin's words had reached inside her and touched something true. James Baldwin's Go Tell It on the Mountain has been taught for decades as a story about religious awakening and family trauma. Maya read, her eyes moving between her paper and the class. And while those elements are certainly present, reducing the novel to just these themes ignores what Baldwin himself said he was trying to accomplish. This isn't just a universal story about faith. It's a specific story about what it means to be Black in America, about the psychological weight that racism places on identity itself. She looked up. A few students were actually listening, leaning forward slightly. Mrs. Hendricks stood perfectly still at the side of the room, her expression unreadable except for a slight tightening around her mouth. Maya continued, gaining confidence. The textbook introduction calls it a coming-of-age story rooted in the Black church tradition, but that description sanitizes what Baldwin was actually doing. He wasn't just writing about the church. He was writing about how racism forces Black Americans to navigate impossible contradictions, to find salvation in a religion that was used to justify their oppression, to build identity in a country that denies their full humanity. She quoted directly from the text, her finger marking the passage in her annotated copy. When John stands on the hill looking down at the white city, Baldwin writes that he feels a hatred that was like a deep, black pit. The textbook glosses over this as adolescent angst. But Baldwin is showing us how racism embeds itself in the psyche of a child who can't escape the knowledge that the world sees him as less than human. Jessica was nodding slightly. Even a few other students looked genuinely engaged. But Mrs. Hendricks' face had gone from neutral to something harder, colder. Maya pressed on, her analysis building. Baldwin connects this to modern experiences, or what were modern in 1953 when he published the book, but the patterns continue. The way John's father Gabriel uses religion as both refuge and weapon. The way the church becomes a space of both community and judgment. The way Blackness itself becomes something to be saved from rather than celebrated. These aren't abstract themes. They're specific critiques of how racism operates through institutions, including religious ones. She quoted Baldwin's own essays, made connections to his later work, showed how Go Tell It on the Mountain was part of a larger project of bearing witness to the Black experience in America. Her arguments were sophisticated, well-sourced, thoughtful. This wasn't a high school essay. This was the work of someone who genuinely wrestled with difficult ideas and come away with something meaningful to say. Baldwin wrote this book because the sanitized versions of Black life he saw in literature and media were lies. He wanted to tell the truth even when it was uncomfortable. Especially when it was uncomfortable. To read this novel as just a universal story about faith is to do exactly what Baldwin was fighting against, to erase the specificity of Black suffering and Black resistance. Maya finished reading and looked up. The classroom was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than usual. Several students looked genuinely moved. One girl in the middle row was furiously taking notes. Even Tyler had stopped smirking and was actually paying attention. Mrs. Hendricks' expression had progressed from cold to glacial. Her perfectly manicured hands were clasped in front of her, knuckles white. In conclusion, Maya said, her voice strong now, Baldwin's genius wasn't in making his story universal. It was in making it undeniably, unapologetically specific, and in that specificity revealing truths that this country still struggles to face. She closed her essay and stood there, waiting for response, feedback, the grade she'd earned. The silence stretched for 3 long seconds. Then Mrs. Hendricks spoke, her voice sharp as a blade. That's quite enough. Maya blinked, uncertain she'd heard correctly. I'm sorry? I said that's quite enough, Miss Richardson. Mrs. Hendricks moved from her position by the wall to the center of the classroom, positioning herself between Maya and the other students like a barrier. You've completely misunderstood the text. Maya felt the floor shift beneath her. But I cited. You cited passages out of context to support a predetermined agenda. Mrs. Hendricks' voice was controlled, professional, devastating. This is exactly the kind of reading I've been trying to teach you all semester to avoid. Maya's hands tightened on her essay. Mrs. Hendricks, if I could just point to the specific passages. Your interpretation is, how shall I put this? Mrs. Hendricks paused as if carefully selecting her words, though Maya suspected she knew exactly what she was going to say. Urban. Narrow. You're projecting modern racial grievances onto a universal story about faith and redemption. The word urban landed like a slap. Everyone in the room knew what it meant, what it was code for. Maya's voice came out smaller than she intended. But Baldwin himself said in his essays that Miss Richardson, James Baldwin was writing about the human condition. Yes, his characters are Black, but great literature transcends the specifics of race. It speaks to universal human experiences. Your reading is reductive. You're taking a profound meditation on spirituality and family and reducing it to, she waved her hand dismissively, identity politics. Jessica had gone pale. Several other students were staring at their desks, suddenly fascinated by the wood grain. Tyler's smirk had returned. Maya felt something cracking inside her chest, but she tried once more. With respect, Mrs. Hendricks, the universality doesn't erase the specificity. Baldwin was writing about both. He said in Notes of a Native Son, that perhaps your background makes it difficult for you to see beyond surface-level identity politics. The classroom went completely silent. Even the students who'd been trying to ignore what was happening looked up. Jessica's hand had moved to her mouth. Emma Sullivan's eyes went wide. The words hung in the air like poison gas, spreading, contaminating everything. Your background. Mrs. Hendricks had said it so smoothly, so professionally, with that slight sympathetic tilt of her head that made it sound almost kind. Like she was just noting a limitation, a natural blind spot that poor Maya couldn't help having. But everyone heard what she really meant. Maya was shaking now, but she kept her voice as controlled as she could. Mrs. Hendricks, with respect, Baldwin himself said that ignoring the racial context of his work was a form of, do not contradict me in my classroom. The words came out like a whip crack. Mrs. Hendricks took 2 steps toward Maya's desk, her face still composed but her eyes blazing. The professional mask had slipped just enough to show the anger beneath. Your scholarship here does not entitle you to rewrite literary criticism. There it was. Scholarship. She'd said it louder than necessary, making sure everyone heard. Making sure everyone remembered that Maya wasn't really one of them, that she was here on charity, that she should be grateful and quiet and accept whatever interpretation she was given. The word echoed in the silence. Maya saw Emma glance at Tyler. Saw Tyler's smirk widen. Saw other students shift uncomfortably, some looking away, others watching with the horrified fascination of people witnessing a car crash. Mrs. Hendricks walked to Maya's desk and held out her hand. Give me the essay. Maya clutched it tighter. Mrs. Hendricks, please, if you would just. The essay. Now. Slowly Maya handed it over. She'd spent hours on it. Days. She'd revised it 6 times, checking every citation, strengthening every argument. She'd read it to her father the night before, and he'd told her it was brilliant, that her mother would be so proud. Mrs. Hendricks took the essay and returned to the front of the classroom. Then, with deliberate theatrical precision, she began to read it aloud. But not the way Maya had read it, with passion and purpose. She read it in a mocking voice, adding pauses and emphasis that twisted the meaning. Baldwin's genius wasn't in making his story universal, Mrs. Hendricks read, her voice dripping with sarcasm. It was in making it undeniably, unapologetically specific. She looked up from the paper. Undeniably. Unapologetically. These are the words of someone more interested in making political statements than in understanding literature. She continued reading, stopping to add commentary. The psychological weight that racism places on identity itself. This is amateurish phrasing. Agenda-driven rather than analytical. She flipped to another page. Sanitized versions of Black life. Who are you to decide what versions are sanitized? Are you suggesting that decades of literary scholars have been wrong, and you, a 14-year-old scholarship student, have discovered the true meaning? Maya felt tears burning behind her eyes but refused to let them fall. Around her, the classroom had become a courtroom and she was on trial. Revealing truths that this country still struggles to face, Mrs. Hendricks read, shaking her head. This reads like a social media post, not an academic essay. Where is the objectivity? Where is the scholarly distance? Where is the intellectual rigor? She walked back toward Maya's desk, still holding the essay. This entire piece is colored by personal bias and contemporary political rhetoric. You've let your feelings override your critical thinking. Then, with a gesture that seemed to happen in slow motion, Mrs. Hendricks crumpled the essay. Just squeezed it in both hands until Maya's carefully formatted pages, her hours of work, her citations and arguments and passion, became a wrinkled ball of paper. She dropped it on the floor in front of Maya's desk. The sound of it hitting the ground was very small. But in that silent classroom it was deafening. Start over, Mrs. Hendricks said, her voice returning to that cool professional tone. And this time try to understand what Baldwin was actually saying, not what you wish he was saying. Not what fits your predetermined narrative. What he actually wrote. Due Monday. You'll need at least A/B to pass this semester. She turned away from Maya, dismissing her, and addressed the class. This is an important lesson for all of you. Literature is not a vehicle for personal grievances. It's not a platform for political agendas. Great literature transcends the circumstances of its creation to speak to universal human truths. That's what makes it great. That's what makes it last. Remember that. Maya sat frozen, staring at her crumpled essay on the floor. Her hands were shaking. Her throat was so tight she couldn't breathe. Around her, she could feel the weight of everyone's eyes, the mixture of pity and relief and judgment. If you're feeling what Maya's feeling right now, hit that subscribe button because this story is about to take a turn that Mrs. Hendricks never saw coming. Maya's vision blurred. She blinked rapidly, determined not to cry, not here, not in front of everyone. But she could feel the tears building behind her eyes like a dam about to break. Her hands moved almost without her permission, reaching down to pick up the crumpled paper. The words came out as barely more than a whisper, but in the awful silence of that classroom, everyone heard them. My mother was a teacher. She taught me that literature is meant to reflect truth, not hide from it. She didn't look up as she said it. She was talking to the crumpled essay in her hands, to the memory of her mother, to herself. But Mrs. Hendricks heard it as a challenge. The older woman's face went rigid. When she spoke, her voice was ice. Well, your mother clearly had different standards than Whitmore Academy. You can either meet ours or leave. The words were designed to wound, and they hit their target perfectly. Maya's mother, who'd spent her life teaching kids that society had written off. Who'd believed every child deserved to be seen and heard and valued. Who'd taught Maya to be proud of who she was, to use her voice, to trust her own insights. Mrs. Hendricks had just dismissed all of that as substandard, as less than, as not good enough for this place. Maya felt something break inside her chest. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a quiet crack like ice forming over water. The bell rang sharp and sudden. Students erupted from their seats with the desperate energy of people fleeing a disaster. They grabbed their bags, their books, and headed for the door. Some glanced at Maya as they passed. A few looks held sympathy. Most held relief that it hadn't been them. Tyler walked by with Emma, and Maya heard him mutter something that ended with affirmative action, before they disappeared into the hallway. Jessica hesitated, looking torn between staying and leaving, but Mrs. Hendricks was still standing there, and the message was clear. This conversation was over, get out. I'll find you, Jessica mouthed, and then she was gone too. The classroom emptied in less than a minute. Mrs. Hendricks gathered her things with precise, unhurried movements, not looking at Maya, not acknowledging her presence. Then she too walked out, her heels clicking against the floor in a steady, confident rhythm. Maya sat alone in the empty classroom, holding her crumpled essay, and finally let the tears fall. She made it to the bathroom before completely breaking down. The girls' bathroom on the second floor, the one that was usually empty during passing period. She locked herself in the farthest stall and pressed her back against the cold metal door, and everything she'd been holding back came out in gasping, silent sobs. It wasn't just today. It was every day this semester. Every raised hand ignored. Every essay marked down for vague reasons. Every subtle dismissal and microaggression. Every time she'd swallowed her frustration and told herself to just push through, just be twice as good, just prove them wrong. And it hadn't mattered. None of it had mattered. She'd written the best essay she'd ever written, and Mrs. Hendricks had literally thrown it on the floor. The bathroom door opened. Footsteps. Maya? Are you in here? Jessica's voice. Maya tried to stop crying to get herself under control, but her breath kept hitching. Maya, I know you're in here. I can see your backpack. Slowly, Maya unlocked the stall door. Jessica stood there, her own eyes red, and without a word pulled Maya into a hug. Maya clung to her friend and cried harder. I'm so sorry, Jessica whispered. I'm so sorry. I've never seen anything like that. That was cruel. They stood there for a long moment, Maya crying, Jessica holding her. Finally, Maya pulled back, wiping her face with her sleeve. I can't keep doing this, she said, her voice raw. Every single class, Jess. It's every single class. Nothing I do is good enough. Nothing I say matters. She looks at me like Maya's voice broke. Like I don't belong here. Have you told your dad? Maya shook her head violently. He's working so hard to keep me here. Double shifts, overtime, he's exhausted all the time. And it's all so I can go to this school, have these opportunities. I can't tell him I'm failing. I can't tell him that his daughter can't handle one racist teacher. Maya, you're not failing. Your essay was incredible. Everyone knew it. Even Tyler looked impressed before Hendricks started. It doesn't matter what everyone knew. Maya's hands were shaking. She's going to fail me. She made that clear. I need at least a B to pass the semester, and there's no way she's going to give it to me. Not after today. She'll find reasons to mark down whatever I submit. She's been doing it all year. Jessica looked helpless. There has to be something we can do. Someone we can tell. Who? Maya laughed bitterly. The administration loves her. She's been there forever. And what am I going to say? That she's treating me unfairly? She'll just show them my grades and say I'm not meeting standards. She's too smart to be obvious about it. Maya leaned against the sink, catching her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes were swollen, her face blotchy. She looked defeated. She felt defeated. Then she saw her backpack and through the open zipper, the corner of her mother's journal. She pulled it out, holding the worn leather cover. Her mother's journal. The one filled with lesson plans and reflections and notes of encouragement. The one her mother had carried every day to school, even at the end when she was so sick she could barely stand. Maya opened it to a random page. Her mother's handwriting, strong and clear. Today Marcus Chen came to me crying because his English teacher told him he'd never really understand American literature, because of his background. I reported it. I don't care if it makes me unpopular. Some things are more important than being liked. Her mother had fought these battles. Had stood up for her students even when it cost her. Maya looked at Jessica. Then she pulled out her phone. What are you doing? Jessica asked. Maya's hands were steadier now. The tears had stopped. Something had shifted in her expression, grief hardening into determination. I'm calling my dad. Maya, you just said. I know what I said. But my mom didn't raise me to accept this. And my dad. She paused, thinking about her father, the way he moved through the world now, quiet and careful, so different from the stories her mother used to tell about him. My dad deserves to know what's happening to his daughter. The phone rang once. Twice. Then her father's voice, concerned immediately because she never called during school hours. Maya? Baby girl, what's wrong? And Maya, standing in that bathroom with her best friend beside her and her mother's journal in her hand, told him everything. Have you ever had a teacher who treated you unfairly? How did you handle it? Share your experience in the comments below. Maya's about to show us what happens when you refuse to stay silent. Marcus Richardson was 40 feet up on scaffolding when his phone rang. The construction site was loud. Jackhammers, cement mixers, men shouting instructions over the noise. He almost didn't hear it. But something made him check, and when he saw Maya's name on the screen during school hours, his stomach dropped. He pulled off his work gloves and answered immediately. Maya? Baby girl, what's wrong? There was silence on the other end, but not empty silence. He could hear her breathing, could hear that particular quality of quiet that meant she was trying not to cry. Maya, talk to me. What happened? And then it came pouring out. Not in order, not coherently at first. Words tumbling over each other as Maya tried to explain what had happened in Mrs. Hendricks' class. The essay she'd worked so hard on. The way Hendricks had mocked it in front of everyone. The crumpled paper on the floor. The words your background and scholarship, weaponized like slurs. Marcus stood very still on that scaffolding 40 feet above the ground, listening to his daughter's voice break as she described being humiliated in front of her peers. His grip on the phone got tighter. His jaw clenched. But his voice when he spoke was calm. Controlled. The kind of calm that people who knew him well would recognize as dangerous. She said, what about your background? Maya repeated it, her voice small. She said, maybe my background makes it hard for me to see beyond surface-level identity politics. And then when I tried to defend my analysis, she said my scholarship doesn't entitle me to rewrite literary criticism. She said it loud enough for everyone to hear. Marcus closed his eyes. He was seeing his daughter, brilliant and passionate, standing in that classroom. He was seeing his wife, who'd fought these same battles for her students. And he was seeing himself 3 years ago, a different man before grief had stripped everything away. Baby girl, I need you to do something for me. Can you send me that essay? The one she threw on the floor? Dad, it's crumpled, I don't care what it looks like. Send me a photo of it and send me the digital file if you have it. And Maya? I need you to write down everything that's happened this semester with Mrs. Hendricks. Every comment, every grade you questioned, every time she dismissed you. Dates if you remember them. Details. Everything. Dad, I don't want to make trouble. You're not making trouble. She made trouble when she decided to treat my daughter like she doesn't belong in that classroom. His voice was still quiet, still controlled, but there was steel underneath. Your mother spent her whole career fighting for kids who weren't being seen. She wouldn't want you to accept this. And neither do I. Maya was crying again, but differently now. I'm sorry, Dad. I know you're working so hard to keep me there and I'm... Stop. Stop right there. I'm proud of you for speaking up. Your mother would be too. You wrote an essay that challenged conventional thinking, and you defended it even when it was hard. That takes courage. That takes intellectual honesty. Don't you dare apologize for that. He could hear her breathing steadying on the other end of the line. Send me everything. I'll handle this. Okay. Okay. I love you, baby girl. I love you too, Dad. Marcus hung up and stood there for a moment looking at his phone, his reflection in the black screen. Then he looked down at his work uniform. The company logo on his chest. The dust and concrete stains on his jeans. His calloused hands. And something that had been sleeping for 3 years woke up. Marcus Richardson hadn't always been a construction worker. Once upon a time, not that long ago really, he'd been a different person entirely. He'd had a law degree from Howard University, top of his class. He'd been an education policy attorney, one of the best, working on cases that shaped how schools treated disadvantaged students. He'd argued before state boards, federal courts, had won settlements that changed district policies across 3 states. People had called him brilliant, relentless, a force of nature in a courtroom. Then his wife got sick. Cancer, aggressive and merciless. She went from healthy to dying in 6 months, and Marcus had watched helpless as the person he loved most in the world was taken piece by piece. He'd kept working at first, taking calls from her hospital room, reviewing briefs while sitting by her bed. But near the end, work stopped mattering. Cases stopped mattering. Everything stopped mattering except being there. After she died, he'd fallen apart. Quietly but completely. He'd missed court dates. Stopped returning calls. Would sit in his office staring at walls for hours. His partners had been understanding at first, then concerned, then frustrated. Finally, they'd suggested he take a leave of absence. He never went back. Instead, he'd taken the first job he could find that didn't require thinking, that didn't require being the person he'd been before. Construction work. Physical labor. Clock in, clock out, go home to Maya, be present for his daughter in a way he couldn't be when he was drowning in grief. For 3 years, that's who he'd been. Marcus Richardson, construction worker. Good with his hands. Reliable. Quiet. A man who'd left his old life behind. But the law degree was still there. The sharp mind that could dissect arguments and find weaknesses and build cases that were airtight, that was still there too. He'd just put it away like a suit hanging in the back of a closet. Now, standing on that scaffolding with his daughter's broken voice still echoing in his ears, Marcus felt something shift. The fog that had surrounded him for 3 years was lifting. The numbness was cracking. Someone had hurt his daughter. Had humiliated her for being smart, for being thoughtful, for being black in a space that didn't want her there. Had done exactly what his wife had spent her career fighting against. And Marcus Richardson, education policy attorney, was about to come out of retirement. He climbed down from the scaffolding and found his foreman. I need to leave early today. Family emergency. The foreman, who'd worked with Marcus for 2 years and never seen him ask for anything, nodded immediately. Everything okay? It will be. Marcus drove home still in his work clothes, but his mind was already somewhere else. Already building the case. Already seeing the angles. It was like muscle memory, like picking up an instrument you'd played for years and finding your fingers still knew the notes. He pulled into the parking lot of his apartment building, sat in his truck for a moment, then made a phone call. A number he hadn't dialed in 3 years. James Chin. James? It's Marcus Richardson. Silence on the other end. Then, Marcus? My God, it's been, how long has it been? 3 years. I know. I'm sorry I dropped off the map. No apologies. After Catherine died, I understood. We all understood. How are you? How's Maya? Maya's why I'm calling. I need a favor. James Chin had been Marcus's colleague back in the day, another education attorney fighting the good fight. They'd worked on cases together, had won and lost together, had been friends. After Catherine died and Marcus disappeared, James had reached out a few times, but eventually let him go, respecting his need for space. What Marcus had forgotten, or maybe just hadn't put together until now, was that James had left legal work too, but for different reasons. He transitioned into education administration and now. James, you're on the Whitmore Academy School Board, aren't you? Pause. I am. Why? Because my daughter goes there on scholarship. And one of her teachers has been systematically discriminating against her. Today it escalated. I need everything you have on a teacher named Patricia Hendricks. And I need to know the process for requesting an emergency board meeting. James's voice changed, became sharper, more focused. Marcus heard the attorney in him waking up too. Tell me everything. Marcus did. When he finished, James was quiet for a long moment. Patricia Hendricks. I've heard things. Complaints that went nowhere. She's been there forever, has allies in administration. But Marcus, if you're building what I think you're building, I am. Send me everything you have. And Marcus? It's good to hear your voice. I've missed having you in the fight. I've missed being in it. That evening, Marcus transformed their small apartment into a war room. He'd changed out of his work clothes and into jeans and a button-down shirt. Not yet the suit, but not the construction worker either. Something in between. Someone emerging. Maya's essay sat on the table, carefully smoothed out. Marcus had read it 3 times now, and each time he was more impressed. This wasn't just good work. This was exceptional. Sophisticated analysis, strong argumentation, thoughtful engagement with both the primary text and Baldwin's broader body of work. Any honest educator would have given this an A. But Mrs. Hendricks hadn't been interested in honesty. Maya came home from school looking exhausted. She'd sent him the timeline he'd requested, a detailed account of every incident with Mrs. Hendricks this semester. Reading it had made Marcus's blood boil, but he'd kept his expression neutral. This was a legal case now, and cases required clear heads. How was the rest of your day? He asked. Maya shrugged, dropping her backpack by the door. Okay, I guess. Jessica's been great. Some other kids were actually nice about what happened. But Dad, I don't know if this is worth. Let me worry about what's worth what. Right now, I need you to do your homework, have some dinner, and trust me. Can you do that? She nodded, but he could see the doubt in her eyes. She'd only ever known him as the construction worker, the quiet dad who worked hard and came home tired. She didn't remember the attorney, the man who'd made school districts tremble. She was about to find out. Marcus's phone buzzed. A text from James. Jessica's bringing you something. Says you'll want to see it. 20 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. Jessica stood there with her backpack looking nervous. Mr. Richardson? Maya said you needed samples of other students' work from Mrs. Hendricks' class. Marcus invited her in. Jessica pulled out carefully photocopied essays, assignments from Tyler Bradford and Emma Sullivan and 3 other students. She'd done it carefully, making sure nothing could be traced back to her. I could get in trouble for this, Jessica said quietly. But what she did to Maya was wrong. Everyone knows it was wrong. Marcus looked through the essays. Tyler's paper on Baldwin, the one that had received an A+ and lavish praise. Emma's mediocre analysis that had gotten a B+. He compared them to Maya's work. The pattern was undeniable. Maya's essay was superior in every measurable way, stronger thesis, better evidence, more sophisticated analysis. But she'd been humiliated and told to start over, while work that was objectively weaker had been celebrated. Thank you, Jessica. This helps more than you know. After Jessica left, Marcus continued building his case. He found contact information for other scholarship students who'd had Hendricks in previous years. Started making calls. 2 agreed to talk to him, their voices cautious at first, then increasingly angry as they shared their own experiences. One of them, a girl named Destiny who was now at Princeton, told him she'd gotten AC in Hendricks' class despite having a 4.0 GPA and everything else. She told me I had potential but lacked refinement. I found out later that year that she'd written in my recommendation letter that I was bright but occasionally combative. It almost cost me my scholarship. Would you be willing to provide a written statement? Marcus asked. For Maya? Absolutely. It's about time someone held Hendricks accountable. If you're realizing that Marcus isn't just any construction worker and you want to see what he does next, make sure you're subscribed because this is about to get really good. The next morning, Maya was at school when something unexpected happened. She was at her locker between classes when Mr. Davis, the younger English teacher, approached her. He looked nervous, kept glancing around like he didn't want to be seen. Maya, can I talk to you for a minute? Privately? They stepped into an empty classroom. Mr. Davis closed the door, then turned to face her with an expression that was equal parts guilty and determined. I saw what happened in Mrs. Hendricks' class yesterday. I heard about it from other teachers too. And I want you to know, it wasn't right. What she did wasn't right. Maya didn't know what to say. None of the other teachers had said anything. Most had avoided eye contact with her in the hallways. Mr. Davis continued, speaking quickly like he was afraid he'd lose his nerve. I've been teaching here for 2 years and I've been noticing things. The way she talks about certain students. The patterns in her grading. I started documenting it about 6 months ago because it just felt wrong, but I didn't know what to do with the information. I'm junior faculty, she's an institution. Who was going to listen to me? He pulled a USB drive from his pocket. But I think you should know you're not the first. And I think your father should know that what happened to you is part of a much bigger pattern. I could lose my job for this. But some things are more important than job security. He pressed the USB drive into Maya's hand. There are emails on here. Communications between Mrs. Hendricks and administration. Complaint records. Grade comparisons. 5 years worth of data. I've been collecting it because I thought someday someone would need it. I think that day is now. Maya stared at the small device in her palm. Mr. Davis, why are you doing this? Because I became a teacher to help students, not to be complicit in discrimination. And because when I was in school, I had a teacher who made me feel like I didn't belong because my family didn't have money. Nobody stood up for me then. Maybe I can stand up for you now. He left quickly before she could thank him properly. Maya stood there holding the USB drive, feeling the weight of it, knowing it was more than just plastic and metal. It was evidence. It was ammunition. It was other people's pain documented and preserved. She texted her father immediately, "You need to see this." That night, Marcus and Maya sat side by side at their small kitchen table, the laptop open between them, reviewing the contents of the USB drive. What they found was damning. Email after email from Patricia Hendricks to the Whitmore administration. Complaints about declining academic standards that coincidentally started right after the school expanded its scholarship program. Concerns about students who were unprepared for the rigor of Whitmore's curriculum, language that seemed neutral until you noticed that every student she named was either a minority or from a low-income background. There was an email from 2 years ago. I'm finding it increasingly difficult to maintain the quality of classroom discourse with the current student composition. Perhaps we need to re-evaluate our admissions criteria. Another from 18 months ago in response to a parent complaint about her treatment of a scholarship student. I hold all students to the same high standards. If some students find those standards challenging, perhaps they would be better served at institutions more suited to their preparation level. The coded language was everywhere. Urban perspectives. Cultural barriers to classical literature. Students from non-traditional backgrounds struggling with academic expectations. Mr. Davis had documented every complaint filed against Hendricks over 5 years. 12 in total. 8 from minority students or their parents. Every single one dismissed by administration with variations of, Mrs. Hendricks is a demanding teacher but fair, or high standards benefit all students, or no evidence of discriminatory intent. There was a spreadsheet comparing grades Hendricks had given to scholarship students versus legacy students for identical assignments. The pattern was stark. For the same quality of work, scholarship students consistently received grades half a letter to a full letter lower. And there were records of students transferring out of Hendricks classes. 23 students over 5 years. 17 were minorities or scholarship recipients. Several had left Whitmore entirely, despite having strong grades in all their other classes. But the most damning piece of evidence was an email from just 6 months ago, sent to another veteran teacher in response to the school's new diversity initiative. These diversity initiatives are lowering the quality of discourse in my classroom. We're asked to celebrate different perspectives, but what we're actually doing is making excuses for students who aren't prepared for this level of work. I didn't spend 28 years building academic excellence at Whitmore to watch it be dismantled in the name of inclusion. Standards matter. Merit matters. And we're failing our students, all of them, by pretending otherwise. Marcus read it twice. Then he leaned back in his chair, his face expressionless in that particular way that meant he was thinking like a lawyer again. "We have her," he said quietly. Maya looked at her father. "What do you mean?" "I mean this isn't just a pattern. It's documented, systematic discrimination. It violates Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. It violates school district policy. And she was stupid enough to put it in writing." He tapped the screen. This email alone would be enough, but with everything else? The grade comparisons, the complaint history, the testimony from other students? "Maya, this is an airtight case. But what are we going to do with it?" Marcus pulled the laptop toward him and opened a new document. "We're going to file a formal complaint with the school board. We're going to request an emergency meeting. And we're going to present every piece of this evidence in a way that makes it impossible for them to ignore or dismiss." His fingers moved across the keyboard, and Maya watched in amazement. This wasn't the tired man who came home from construction sites. This was someone else entirely. Someone confident and precise and almost frightening in his focus. "Dad, have you done this before?" Marcus paused, his hands hovering over the keys. Then he looked at his daughter. "Baby girl, I need to tell you something about who your father used to be." And he did. He told her about Howard Law School, about being an education policy attorney, about cases he'd won and systems he'd changed. He told her about the work he'd loved and how he'd walked away from it after her mother died because grief had made him smaller, made the world too heavy to carry. "You were a lawyer?" Maya's voice was awed. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because that person felt like someone else. Someone from before. But maybe..." He looked at the evidence on the screen, at his daughter's crumpled essay, at the USB drive full of other students' pain. "Maybe it's time for him to come back." He returned to the keyboard, typing rapidly now. A formal complaint, carefully worded, legally precise. Every allegation backed by evidence. Every claim documented with dates, witnesses, supporting materials. It was a thing of beauty if legal documents could be beautiful. A trap built from facts and logic that Mrs. Hendricks wouldn't be able to escape. When he finished, it was after midnight. Maya had fallen asleep with her head on the table. Marcus saved the document, then picked up his phone and made one more call. "Whitmore Academy Administration, this is the after-hours line." "Yes, this is Marcus Richardson. I need to file a formal complaint and request an emergency school board meeting regarding discriminatory conduct by a faculty member. I'll be submitting documentation tomorrow. The matter is urgent and involves ongoing civil rights violations." The voice on the other end became significantly more alert. "Sir, I'll need to transfer you to. I'll submit everything in writing tomorrow morning, with copies to each board member individually and to the district's Title VI coordinator. I'm calling as a courtesy to give advance notice that this is coming. The school board will want to address this quickly, I imagine, before it becomes a legal matter outside the school's purview." He gave them his contact information and hung up. Then he looked at his daughter, sleeping peacefully now, trusting him to fix this. Marcus Richardson walked to his closet and pulled out the suit he hadn't worn in 3 years. Still in the dry cleaning plastic. Still perfectly tailored. He hung it on the back of the door where he could see it. Tomorrow he would stop being the construction worker and become the attorney again. Not permanently, maybe. But long enough to remind Whitmore Academy that his daughter deserved better. That all the students Mrs. Hendricks had hurt deserved better. Long enough to get justice. What would you do if you discovered you had the power to fight back against injustice after years of staying quiet? Let us know in the comments, because Marcus is about to show Mrs. Hendricks exactly what happens when you underestimate the wrong person. The next morning, Maya Richardson walked through the doors of Whitmore Academy with her shoulders back and her head up. She was still scared, her hands trembled slightly as she gripped her backpack straps, but there was something different about her now. A kind of quiet determination that came from knowing she wasn't fighting alone anymore. She'd watched her father work until 2 in the morning, building a case with the precision of a surgeon and the passion of someone fighting for something that mattered. She'd seen him transform from the tired construction worker into someone she barely recognized, someone sharp and focused and almost dangerous in his competence. And she'd realized something: she came from people who fought back. Students passed her in the hallway and Maya caught some of them staring. Word had spread about what happened in Mrs. Hendricks' class. Some faces showed sympathy. Others showed curiosity. A few showed that particular kind of satisfaction people feel when watching someone else's humiliation, grateful it wasn't them. Maya kept walking. Jessica found her at her locker, relief flooding her face. "How are you? I was worried about you all night." "I'm okay. Better than okay, actually." Maya lowered her voice. "My dad is handling it." "Your dad, the construction worker?" Maya smiled, and it was a real smile, maybe the first in days. "Yeah. Turns out there's more to my dad than I knew." The warning bell rang. Time for English class. Time to face Mrs. Hendricks again. Jessica grabbed her hand. "You've got this. And I'm right here." They walked to class together. When Maya entered the room, she felt the familiar knot in her stomach, but she didn't look away when Mrs. Hendricks glanced up. Their eyes met for just a moment, and Maya saw something flicker across the teacher's face. Satisfaction. Triumph. The look of someone who believed she'd won. Mrs. Hendricks thought she'd broken Maya Richardson. Thought the humiliation had done its job, that Maya would come back smaller, quieter, more compliant. A scholarship student who'd learned her place. She had no idea what was coming. Maya took her assigned seat in the back. Tyler was already there, looking smug. Emma sat beside him, her notebook open, performing her role as always. Other students filed in, the usual pre-class chatter filling the room. Mrs. Hendricks waited for everyone to settle, then turned to the class with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. When she spoke, her voice was syrupy sweet, thick with false warmth. "Good morning, everyone. I hope we can start fresh today." She looked directly at Maya. "Particularly you, Miss Richardson. I hope you've had time to reflect on our discussion yesterday and understand that my feedback, while perhaps delivered firmly, comes from a place of wanting to see you succeed." The words were conciliatory, but the tone carried a message. "I won. You learned your lesson. We can move forward now that you know your place." Maya said nothing. Just nodded once, her face expressionless. Mrs. Hendricks seemed pleased by the silence. She turned to the board, launching into the day's lesson on Emily Dickinson. As she wrote, Tyler leaned toward Emma and whispered something. Maya caught only fragments. "Finally learned. And, about time." He glanced back at Maya with a smirk, expecting to see shame or anger or hurt. Instead, Maya was looking straight ahead, her hand resting near her notebook. Under the desk, Jessica found that hand and squeezed it. Maya squeezed back. The class proceeded normally. Mrs. Hendricks called on students, discussed themes of isolation and mortality in Dickinson's poetry, assigned reading for the next class. She was in her element, commanding the room with the confidence of someone who'd been doing this for 28 years and believed herself untouchable. She didn't call on Maya once. Didn't even look at her. It was as if yesterday's humiliation had been so effective that Maya Richardson no longer needed to be acknowledged. The problem had been solved. The troublemaker had been put in her place. But if Mrs. Hendricks had been paying closer attention, she might have noticed something. The way some students kept glancing at Maya with curiosity instead of pity. The way Jessica Chin sat a little straighter, a little more defiant. The way even Emma Sullivan looked uncomfortable when Tyler made another cruel whisper. Something had shifted even if Mrs. Hendricks couldn't see it yet. The teacher's lounge during third period was a sacred space for Whitmore Academy's veteran faculty. Comfortable chairs, a good coffee maker, a quiet place to escape students for 45 minutes. Mrs. Hendricks settled into her usual spot with her usual companions, Margaret Winters and Robert Fitzgerald, both teachers who'd been at Whitmore almost as long as she had. "You look pleased with yourself, Patricia," Margaret observed, sipping her tea. "I had to have a difficult conversation with a student yesterday. One of the scholarship girls. She needed to understand that academic standards aren't negotiable, no matter what contemporary progressive education theory might suggest." Mrs. Hendricks selected a biscuit from the plate on the table. It was unpleasant but necessary. These students need to learn that feeling good about themselves isn't the same as actually doing good work. Robert nodded sympathetically. "The entitlement is remarkable sometimes. They think a scholarship means they're ready for this level, but they're not," Patricia finished. "And we do them no favors by pretending otherwise. I'm trying to prepare them for the real world, where standards matter and participation trophies don't exist." Margaret leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Was it the Richardson girl? I heard something happened in your class yesterday." News travels fast. Patricia allowed herself a small smile. "Yes, it was Maya Richardson. Brilliant in her own way, I suppose, but she consistently lets her personal politics color her academic work. Yesterday she presented an essay on Baldwin that was more social commentary than literary analysis. I had to be quite firm with her." "How did she take it?" "She was upset, naturally. But this morning she was appropriately subdued. I think we reached an understanding." They continued talking, the conversation drifting to complaints about the administration's latest initiatives, the declining quality of student preparation, the constant pressure to accommodate rather than challenge. It was a familiar script, one they performed many times before in this lounge, surrounded by people who agreed with them, insulated from consequences. Then the door opened and Principal Dr. Coleman entered. He was a mild-mannered man in his early 50s, generally well-liked by faculty, not one for confrontation. But today his expression was serious, almost uncomfortable. "Patricia, could I speak with you in my office?" The three teachers exchanged glances. Mrs. Hendricks set down her coffee, smoothing her skirt as she stood. "Of course, David. Is something wrong? Let's discuss it privately." They walked through the hallways, neither speaking. Mrs. Hendricks felt a small flutter of unease but pushed it away. She'd been summoned to the principal's office before, usually to receive praise for her high standards or to be consulted on curriculum decisions. She was an institution at Whitmore. Whatever this was, it couldn't be serious. Dr. Coleman's office was neat and professional, his desk organized, his walls covered with photos of students and awards the school had won. He gestured for her to sit, then settled into his own chair, his hands folded on the desk between them. "Patricia, I've received a formal complaint." Mrs. Hendricks felt that flutter again, but she kept her expression neutral. Parents complained sometimes. It never went anywhere. She had tenure, an impeccable record, 28 years of excellence. I see. Regarding your treatment of Maya Richardson. The complaint alleges a pattern of discriminatory conduct based on race and socioeconomic status. Patricia actually laughed, a short, sharp sound. From the Richardson girl? David, please. I gave her critical feedback on substandard work. If she found that hurtful, perhaps she needs to develop thicker skin. The real world won't coddle her. The complaint isn't from Maya. It's from her father, Marcus Richardson. The construction worker? Patricia's voice dripped with dismissal. What's he going to do, file a grievance with the school board? I've weathered parent complaints before. They never amount to anything because my work speaks for itself. Dr. Coleman shifted in his chair, looking increasingly uncomfortable. Patricia, the complaint is comprehensive. It includes documentary evidence, testimony from other students, comparative grade analysis, and communications that you've sent to administration over the past several years. For the first time, Mrs. Hendricks felt genuine unease. What communications? Emails regarding scholarship students and diversity initiatives. Language about student preparation and academic standards. Patricia, taken in isolation, these things might seem like legitimate academic concerns. But compiled together, in context with the grade patterns and student testimony, they paint a concerning picture. This is ridiculous. I hold all students to the same standards. There's a board meeting requested. An emergency session. Mrs. Hendricks sat forward sharply. A board meeting? Over one student's hurt feelings? David, you can't be serious. I've been teaching here for 28 years. I've won teaching awards. My students go to Ivy League schools. One disgruntled scholarship student doesn't warrant. Marcus Richardson has requested it. And the board has agreed to convene. Dr. Coleman paused, looking like he very much didn't want to say the next part. Apparently he used to be an attorney. An education policy attorney, specifically. The words landed like a physical blow. Mrs. Hendricks felt her carefully constructed confidence crack. Used to be. He practiced for years before his wife died. Won several high-profile cases involving discriminatory treatment of minority students in educational settings. Then he dropped out of the profession. But it seems he's back. Mrs. Hendricks sat very still. Her mind was racing, recalculating. A construction worker she could dismiss. An attorney specializing in education discrimination was an entirely different matter. Especially one who apparently knew how to build a case. When is this meeting? 4 p.m. today. Today? That's impossible. I need time to prepare, to consult with the union. The union rep will be there. Patricia, I'm telling you this as a courtesy. The complaint is serious. The evidence is substantial. You should prepare accordingly. Mrs. Hendricks stood, her legs slightly unsteady. This is a witch hunt. That's what this is. One student couldn't handle honest academic feedback, and now her father is weaponizing his legal background to intimidate this institution. The board will see through this. But even as she said it, she could hear the uncertainty in her own voice. And she could see in Dr. Coleman's expression that he wasn't sure they would. By lunchtime, the entire school knew something was happening. The rumor mill at Whitmore Academy was efficient and merciless, and word of an emergency school board meeting spread like wildfire through the hallways and classrooms. Students clustered in small groups, voices low but excited. This was drama, real drama, not the usual social hierarchies and relationship gossip. This was a teacher, one of the most powerful teachers in the school, potentially in trouble. Tyler Bradford held court in the cafeteria, surrounded by his usual crowd. Emma Sullivan sat beside him, listening as he pontificated. This is ridiculous, Tyler declared, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. Mrs. Hendricks is the best teacher at this school. She actually maintains standards instead of giving everyone participation medals. If Maya Richardson couldn't handle her class, that's on Maya, not on Mrs. Hendricks. Emma nodded along, but her eyes kept darting to where Maya and Jessica sat across the cafeteria. Other students were watching them too, waiting to see how Maya would react. But at a table in the corner, a different conversation was happening. 3 students, all scholarship recipients, spoke in quieter voices. Remember sophomore year when Mrs. Hendricks told Marcus Chen his English was very good for someone like him? One of them said. He was born in California. He's lived here his entire life. She told Destiny Williams that she had street smarts but lacked academic refinement, another added. Destiny is at Princeton now. Maybe Maya's dad is doing something that should have been done years ago. The conversations rippled through the school. Some students defended Mrs. Hendricks fiercely, seeing any challenge to her as an attack on standards and merit. Others, mostly the scholarship students and minorities, shared their own stories in hushed voices, realizing for the first time that what they'd experienced wasn't isolated, wasn't just them, wasn't something they had to accept as normal. Maya sat through lunch barely eating, her stomach too knotted to handle food. Jessica stayed close, a constant supportive presence. Neither of them spoke much, but they didn't need to. If you're on the edge of your seat waiting to see what happens when Marcus walks into that board meeting, hit that subscribe button right now because you won't believe what's coming next. At 3:30 p.m., Marcus Richardson stood in front of his closet, looking at the suit he'd pulled out the night before. Navy blue, perfectly tailored, still in the dry cleaning plastic from 3 years ago. It felt like armor from another life. A life where he'd walked into rooms and changed outcomes, where his words carried weight and power. He'd spent the day reviewing his case one more time, making sure every piece of evidence was organized, every argument airtight. He'd contacted all his witnesses, confirmed their availability to provide statements. He'd reviewed Title VI regulations, school district policies, precedent cases. His mind had worked like it used to, sharp and relentless, finding angles and building strategies. Felt good. Terrifying but good. Like waking up after a long sleep. Maya appeared in the doorway of his room, watching him. Dad. Marcus turned. His daughter looked scared but trying to be brave, exactly like he felt. You really used to do this? Go to meetings and argue cases and win. I did. And you're going to do it today? For me? Marcus walked over to her, put his hands on her shoulders. Baby girl, I've been ready since my daughter came home crying because a teacher humiliated her for being brilliant. Everything I've done for the past 3 years, leaving my career, taking the construction job, building a simpler life, it was all to be there for you. To be present. To be the father you needed after your mother died. His voice caught slightly on his wife's name, but he continued. But being present doesn't just mean being physically here. It means standing up for you when someone tries to make you feel small. Your mother would have marched into that school the same day it happened. I'm just a little late to the fight. He pulled the suit from the closet, removed the plastic. Today, baby girl, your father goes back to work. Maya's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. She'd be proud of you. Mom would be so proud. She'd be proud of you too. For writing that essay. For defending your ideas. For refusing to be silent. Marcus hung the suit on the door, checking the time. Now I need to get ready. This meeting starts in exactly 26 minutes, and I intend to walk in looking like someone they should have taken seriously from the beginning. His phone rang. James Chin. Marcus, just confirming, the meeting is set for 4 p.m. All board members will be there. Dr. Coleman will be there. Mrs. Hendricks will have a union representative. Are you ready? Marcus looked at his reflection in the mirror. Looked at the suit. Looked at his daughter standing in the doorway, belief and hope written across her face. I've been ready since my daughter came home crying, James. Let's remind Whitmore Academy what happens when they underestimate the wrong person. He hung up and began to dress. The shirt, crisp and white. The tie, silk, perfectly knotted. The jacket, fitting like it had been made for him because it had. Each piece transformed him, layer by layer, from Marcus the construction worker to Marcus the attorney. Maya watched the transformation with wonder. You look different. I feel different. I feel like myself again. He checked his briefcase one more time. The formal complaint, printed and bound. The evidence, organized in labeled tabs. The witness statements, notarized and ready. The legal citations, highlighted and annotated. The USB drive with Mr. Davis's documentation. Maya's crumpled essay, carefully preserved in a plastic sleeve. Everything he needed to dismantle Patricia Hendricks' 28-year reign. Marcus looked at his daughter. When I come home tonight, things will be different. I can't promise exactly how, but they will be. Are you ready for that? Maya nodded. Are you? Marcus smiled, and it was the smile of someone who'd remembered what they were capable of, who'd found a purpose that had been missing for 3 years. I'm ready. He picked up his briefcase, kissed his daughter on the forehead and walked out the door. Not as Marcus Richardson, construction worker, but as Marcus Richardson, Esquire. Education policy attorney. Father. Fighter. And he was going to war. At Whitmore Academy, in a conference room overlooking the perfectly manicured grounds, 5 board members were taking their seats. Dr. Coleman sat to the side looking nervous. Mrs. Patricia Hendricks sat with her union representative, confident despite the earlier crack in her armor, certain that her 28 years of service would outweigh one parent's complaint. None of them were prepared for who was about to walk through that door. Have you ever watched someone completely underestimate the opposition and then realize their mistake too late? Drop a comment about a time you saw someone get what they deserved, because Mrs. Hendricks is about to learn a lesson she'll never forget. The Whitmore Academy boardroom was designed to impress. High ceilings with crown molding, a long mahogany table that could seat 20 oil paintings of the school's founders on the walls. Large windows overlooked the grounds, the carefully maintained lawns and century-old oak trees that whispered of tradition and permanence. At 3:45 p.m., the board members began filing in. James Chin arrived first, his expression carefully neutral despite knowing exactly what was about to unfold. He took his seat at the head of the table, arranging his notes with deliberate precision. 3 other board members followed: Margaret Torres, a former state education official, David Park, a tech executive whose 2 children had graduated from Whitmore, and Sandra Mitchell, a retired federal judge with a reputation for fairness and zero tolerance for nonsense. They spoke in low voices, reviewing the preliminary complaint that had been submitted that morning. Even with just the overview without all the supporting evidence, the allegations were serious enough to warrant this emergency session. Dr. Coleman entered looking like a man facing a firing squad. He nodded to the board members, took his seat to the side, and kept glancing at the door like he was hoping for a natural disaster to cancel the proceedings. At 3:52 p.m., the door opened again. Mrs. Patricia Hendricks walked in and she wasn't alone. Beside her stood Richard Morrison, the teachers' union representative, a man in his 60s with the weary expression of someone who'd defended a lot of teachers over the years and could usually tell within 5 minutes whether they deserved defending. Mrs. Hendricks had chosen her outfit carefully. A conservative navy dress, pearls at her throat, her hair perfect as always. She looked every inch the distinguished educator, the institution, the teacher whose 28 years of service should speak louder than any complaint. She carried a leather folder, her own notes and defense prepared. She took her seat across from the board members, her posture impeccable, her expression a careful blend of concern and confidence. The union rep sat beside her, already reviewing paperwork. "Thank you all for convening on such short notice," Mrs. Hendricks began, her voice steady. "I understand there's been a complaint. I'm confident we can clear this up quickly. There seems to be a misunderstanding about appropriate academic feedback and—" James Chin held up his hand. "Mrs. Hendricks, let's wait for all parties to arrive before we begin." She nodded, settling back in her chair. The clock on the wall ticked forward. 3:55, 3:56, 3:57. The door remained closed. Mrs. Hendricks allowed herself a small internal smile. Perhaps the construction worker had realized he was out of his depth. Perhaps common sense had prevailed and this whole ridiculous situation would be dismissed. She'd endured parent complaints before. They always followed the same pattern: emotional accusations, vague grievances, nothing that could stand up to her documented record of excellence. 3:58 p.m. The door opened. And everything Mrs. Patricia Hendricks thought she knew about this meeting evaporated in an instant. The man who walked through that door was not a construction worker. He wore a tailored navy suit that fit him perfectly, the kind that whispered expensive but not flashy. A crisp white shirt, a silk tie the color of deep burgundy. Shoes polished to a mirror shine. He carried a leather briefcase in one hand, the kind attorneys used, worn but well maintained. But it wasn't the clothes that made everyone in the room sit up straighter. It was the way he carried himself. The absolute confidence in his walk, the set of his shoulders, the direct gaze that swept the room and catalogued everything in seconds. This was a man who belonged in rooms like this. A man who knew exactly what he was doing. Marcus Richardson had arrived. Mrs. Hendricks felt her carefully constructed confidence crack like thin ice under weight. Her mouth opened slightly. Her hands, resting on her folder, went very still. This was not what she'd expected. This was not the defeated, overwhelmed parent she'd prepared for. This was something else entirely. Behind Marcus, Maya walked in and the contrast was deliberate. She wore a simple dress, her hair pulled back, looking young and vulnerable and earnest. In her hands she carried a worn leather journal, holding it like a talisman. She took a seat in the gallery area, not at the table. This wasn't her fight to wage directly, but she was here, present, bearing witness. Jessica Chin slipped in behind her, taking a seat next to Maya and immediately reaching for her hand. And then Mr. Davis, the young teacher, entered and sat in the back row, his expression nervous but determined. The room was full now. All the players assembled. James' chin cleared his throat. Thank you all for being here. This is an emergency session of the Whitmore Academy Board of Directors, convened to address a formal complaint filed by Mr. Marcus Richardson regarding discriminatory conduct by faculty member Mrs. Patricia Hendricks. He looked at Marcus. Mr. Richardson, you've requested this meeting. Please proceed. Marcus stood. He didn't rush. He took a moment to set his briefcase on the table, to open it with methodical precision, to remove a bound document and several folders. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, measured, and carried the weight of someone who knew exactly what he was about to do. Thank you. My name is Marcus Richardson. I'm an education policy attorney, and I'm the father of Maya Richardson, an 8th grade student here at Whitmore Academy. The words education policy attorney landed like a bomb. Sandra Mitchell, the retired judge, leaned forward slightly, her interest visibly sharpening. David Park began taking notes. Even the union rep looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Hendricks sat frozen, her face carefully blank, but her knuckles white where they gripped her folder. Marcus continued, his tone conversational but precise. I'm here today because my daughter has been subjected to systematic discriminatory treatment by Mrs. Hendricks over the course of this academic year. This is not about a single incident, though yesterday's classroom humiliation certainly brought the pattern into sharp relief. This is about a sustained course of conduct that violates Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, School District Policy on Equal Treatment, and Basic Standards of Professional Educator Conduct. He pulled out the first folder. Let me begin with a timeline of incidents, all documented with specific dates and, where possible, witnesses. And then Marcus Richardson did what he'd been trained to do, what he'd spent years perfecting before grief had made him walk away. He built a case. He walked them through Maya's first week in Mrs. Hendricks' class, when she'd been seated in the back despite mentioning her vision issues. He cited the specific date, the email Maya had sent requesting a front row seat, Mrs. Hendricks' response that seating is assigned based on student need, and all front seats are currently allocated. He showed them a seating chart. Every student in the front 2 rows came from legacy families or high-income households. Every scholarship student was in the back third of the room. Coincidence? Marcus asked, looking at each board member in turn. Perhaps. In isolation. But let's continue. He walked them through September, when Maya had received a C- on an essay that her previous English teacher, contacted by Marcus just yesterday, said would have easily earned an A in her class. He projected both essays on the screen via the laptop he'd connected to the room's display system. The quality difference was minimal. The grade difference was substantial. October. Maya had raised her hand 14 times during class discussions. Marcus had asked her to keep count, and been called on twice. Meanwhile, Tyler Bradford had been called on 11 times despite raising his hand only 8 times. I have similar statistics for November and December, Marcus said. The pattern is consistent. Maya attempts to participate. Mrs. Hendricks consistently overlooks her in favor of other students. And when she does call on Maya, the feedback is disproportionately critical compared to the feedback given to other students for similar responses. He pulled out another folder. Now let's talk about grades. This was where Marcus's legal training truly showed. He'd obtained, through Jessica and other students who'd volunteered their work once they understood what was happening, copies of assignments from 5 other students in Mrs. Hendricks' class. All names had been redacted except for grade levels and demographic information. Legacy student or scholarship student, family income bracket where relevant. He'd then had 3 English professors from local universities, all experts in secondary education, review the work blind. They'd rated each essay on a standard rubric: thesis strength, evidence quality, analysis depth, writing mechanics, overall effectiveness. The results were projected on the screen for everyone to see. Maya's work consistently scored in the A range from the independent reviewers. Mrs. Hendricks had given her C's and D's. Tyler Bradford's work scored in the B to B- range from reviewers. Mrs. Hendricks had given him A's and A+. Emma Sullivan's work scored in the C+ range. Mrs. Hendricks had given her B+. The pattern was undeniable and damning. For the same quality of work, Maya consistently received grades 1 to 2 full letters lower than her peers. And the correlation wasn't random, it tracked almost perfectly with scholarship status and race. Mrs. Hendricks tried to interrupt. This is absurd, these professors don't understand my specific curriculum standards. Her union rep put a hand on her arm, shaking his head sharply. Don't talk. Not yet. Marcus didn't even acknowledge the interruption. He simply continued, his presentation smooth and relentless. Now, let's examine the events of yesterday which prompted this complaint. He pulled out Maya's essay, still in its protective sleeve, the paper wrinkled and creased from being crumpled. This is my daughter's analytical essay on James Baldwin's Go Tell It on the Mountain. Mrs. Hendricks read portions of it aloud to the class in a mocking tone, called it amateurish and agenda-driven, and then crumpled it and dropped it on the floor in front of my daughter and her classmates. He let that image sit for a moment. The physical evidence of contempt. I've had this essay reviewed by the same 3 professors who evaluated the other work. All 3 rated it as A-level work. One called it remarkably sophisticated for a high school student. Another said it showed genuine critical thinking and engagement with both the primary text and broader literary criticism. He projected their written reviews on the screen, letting the board read the praise. Mrs. Hendricks didn't just give this essay a failing grade. She humiliated my daughter in front of her peers. She told Maya that her background, and I quote, makes it difficult for you to see beyond surface-level identity politics. She told her that her scholarship does not entitle her to rewrite literary criticism. She made Maya's race and economic status explicit issues in a classroom discussion about literature. Marcus paused, letting the weight of those words settle. Then he pulled out the USB drive that Mr. Davis had provided. But this isn't just about my daughter. This is about a pattern of conduct spanning at least 5 years. He plugged the drive into the laptop. Within seconds, emails filled the screen. Mrs. Hendricks' own words, written over years, projected for everyone to read. These diversity initiatives are lowering the quality of discourse in my classroom. Students from non-traditional backgrounds struggling with academic expectations. I'm finding it increasingly difficult to maintain quality with the current student composition. Marcus let the board read in silence. He didn't need to editorialize. The words spoke for themselves. Then he showed them the data Mr. Davis had compiled. 12 complaints filed against Mrs. Hendricks over 5 years. 8 from minority students or their parents. Every single one dismissed by administration with minimal investigation. 23 students transferring out of Mrs. Hendricks' classes over the same period. 17 were minorities or scholarship recipients. Grade patterns showing consistent disparities based on race and economic status. I have written testimony from 2 former students, Marcus said. One is currently at Princeton despite Mrs. Hendricks giving her AC and writing in her recommendation letter that she was bright but occasionally combative. The other left Whitmore entirely after freshman year because, in her words, I couldn't take another year of being made to feel like I didn't belong. He turned to the board. This is not about one bad day. This is not about hurt feelings or a personality conflict. This is about a pattern of discriminatory conduct that violates Title VI of the Civil Rights Act and school district policy. And it's about an institution that has repeatedly failed to address that conduct despite multiple opportunities to do so. Mrs. Hendricks tried again to interrupt, but her union rep was now actively preventing her from speaking, his expression grim. He'd seen enough cases to know a losing hand when he saw one. Marcus closed his briefcase, his presentation complete. The evidence was overwhelming, methodically presented, impossible to dismiss or explain away. He'd built his case the way a master carpenter builds a house, each piece fitting perfectly, the structure solid and unshakable. He sat down, looked at his daughter, and gave her the smallest nod. Your turn. If you're not subscribed yet, you need to be, because you're about to witness one of the most powerful moments in this entire story. James Chin looked at the other board members. There was a brief, silent communication between them, eyebrows raised, slight nods, expressions that said we've seen enough. But protocol demanded they hear from the other side. Mrs. Hendricks, you've heard the allegations and seen the evidence. Would you like to respond? Patricia Hendricks stood, and for the first time in 28 years, she looked genuinely rattled. Her carefully maintained composure was cracking at the edges. Her union rep looked like he wanted to tell her to invoke her right to have this discussion in a less public forum, but she was already talking. I hold all students to the same high standards, she began, her voice not quite as steady as usual. I have for 28 years. My job is to prepare students for college, for the real world, where standards matter and feelings don't. If Miss Richardson felt singled out. Mrs. Hendricks, Marcus interrupted, his voice still calm but carrying new steel. Is my daughter ready for Whitmore Academy? She blinked, thrown by the direct question. That's not what I meant. It's a simple question. You've suggested, both in class and just now, that Maya might not be prepared for this academic level. Is she ready for Whitmore Academy? Yes or no? I didn't say she wasn't ready, I said that her work needed improvement. Her current GPA in all other classes is 3.9. She's taking honors courses in mathematics and science. Her history teacher wrote in her mid-year review that she's one of the most intellectually curious students I've taught in a decade. Her French teacher says she's excelling. Her science teacher nominated her for a regional competition. Every single teacher except you has found her not just ready but exceptional. He pulled out another document, projecting it on screen. These are independent reviews of 3 of Maya's essays for your class, conducted by English professors at the university, state college and community college. All 3 rated her work as A-level. Yet you gave her Ds. The reviews filled the screen, the professors' comments full of praise for Maya's analytical thinking, her sophisticated arguments, her strong writing. Mrs. Hendricks looked at the screen then away. Those professors don't understand my specific curriculum requirements. Or you don't understand your own biases. The words fell like an axe. The room went silent. Mrs. Hendricks' face flushed red. How dare you suggest? I have taught students of all backgrounds for nearly 3 decades. And over those 3 decades, how many scholarship students have you given A's to? Marcus asked. Because according to the data Mr. Davis compiled, the answer is 3. 3 scholarship students received A's in your classes over 28 years. Meanwhile, legacy students received A's at a rate 17 times higher. Mrs. Hendricks opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. She looked at her union rep, who was very deliberately not making eye contact with her. The evidence speaks for itself, Mrs. Hendricks, Sandra Mitchell said quietly. The retired judge had been silent until now, but her voice carried authority. Would you like to explain the email about diversity initiatives lowering the quality of discourse? That was taken out of context. What context makes that statement acceptable? Sandra asked. What context makes it appropriate to suggest that diverse students inherently lower classroom quality? Mrs. Hendricks had no answer. James Chin looked at Maya sitting in the gallery. Miss Richardson, would you like to speak? Maya looked at her father. Marcus nodded, his expression full of pride and encouragement. She stood slowly, her legs shaking, and walked to the front of the room. She held her mother's journal against her chest like a shield. For a moment she just stood there, looking at the board members, at Mrs. Hendricks, at the room full of adults who held power over her education, her future. Then she opened the journal, her hands trembling slightly. My mother wrote this the day before she died, Maya said, her voice soft but clear. She was a teacher too. She taught at a public school in our neighborhood for 15 years. She loved teaching more than almost anything. She found the page she was looking for, the handwriting slightly shaky, written by hands that were already failing. She wrote, I taught Maya that her voice matters. That her perspective, her truth, her experience as a young black girl is not a limitation. It's a lens that helps her see what others miss. I taught her to be proud of who she is, and to never let anyone make her small. Maya's voice broke slightly on the word small, but she continued. Mrs. Hendricks tried to make me small. She tried to make me believe that my perspective didn't matter, that my analysis was wrong just because it came from my experience, that my background was a weakness instead of a strength. She tried to teach me that I didn't belong here. Tears were streaming down Maya's face now, but she didn't wipe them away. She looked directly at Mrs. Hendricks. But my mother taught me better than that. And my father showed me that standing up for what's right is always worth it, even when it's scary. Especially when it's scary. She closed the journal, held it against her heart. I didn't want to cause trouble. I just wanted to learn. I just wanted to write about books I love and share ideas and be taken seriously as a student. I just wanted to be seen. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. I just wanted to be seen. She sat down and the silence in the room was absolute. Even Mrs. Hendricks had tears in her eyes, though whether from recognition or self-pity, it was impossible to say. James Chin cleared his throat roughly. The board needs to deliberate. We'll take a brief recess. The board members filed out into an adjoining conference room. They were gone for exactly 5 minutes, though it felt like hours. Marcus sat with his arm around Maya, who was still crying quietly. Jessica had moved closer, holding Maya's hand. Mr. Davis sat in the back, looking relieved and terrified in equal measure. Mrs. Hendricks sat very still, staring at nothing. Her union rep was whispering to her urgently, probably explaining exactly how bad this was, how little he could do to protect her from consequences this severe, this documented, this public. The door opened. The board members returned, their faces grave. They took their seats. James Chin spoke, his voice formal and final. The board has reviewed the evidence presented and heard testimony from all parties. We find the allegations of discriminatory conduct to be substantiated by overwhelming evidence. Mrs. Hendricks made a small sound, quickly stifled. Mrs. Hendricks, effective immediately, you are placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation by the district's Title VI coordinator. During this period, you are not to contact any current students, including Miss Richardson, or to be present on school grounds except for official investigatory meetings. You can't. Mrs. Hendricks stood, her composure finally breaking completely. I have 28 years at this institution. 28 years of service. You can't do this based on one complaint from one student. Sandra Mitchell's voice cut through like a knife. Which makes this pattern even more inexcusable, Mrs. Hendricks. 28 years means 28 years of students who may have been subjected to this treatment. 28 years of opportunities to recognize and address your biases. 28 years of this institution failing to protect students from discriminatory conduct. James Chin continued. Furthermore, on behalf of the board, I apologize to you, Mr. Richardson, and to you, Maya, for the treatment you've endured. This should never have happened. We failed in our duty to ensure a safe and equitable learning environment. That failure stops now. He looked at Dr. Coleman. The administration will be conducting a comprehensive review of complaint procedures and implementing new oversight protocols. We will also be reviewing cases of any students who transferred out of Mrs. Hendricks' classes over the past 5 years to determine if additional remediation is necessary. Mrs. Hendricks stood frozen, her world collapsing around her. The union rep was gathering his papers, already mentally moving on to his next case. This one was over and they both knew it. If there's nothing else, James said, Mrs. Hendricks, please accompany Dr. Coleman to collect your personal items from your classroom. You'll be contacted within 48 hours about the investigation timeline. Patricia Hendricks walked out of the boardroom like a woman in a dream, or maybe a nightmare. 28 years gone in an hour. Destroyed by her own words, her own documented bias, her own failure to see students as human beings deserving of respect. The door closed behind her and the room exhaled. Marcus stood, helping Maya to her feet. Dr. Coleman approached them hesitantly, looking like a man who knew he should have done something sooner and was ashamed it had taken this to force action. Mr. Richardson, we would like to discuss implementing new protocols, creating better systems for addressing complaints, for ensuring faculty accountability. Would you be willing to consult with us? To help us build something better? Marcus looked at Maya, who was wiping her eyes, who looked exhausted but lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted. He looked at Jessica, who was beaming with pride for her friend. He looked at Mr. Davis, who had risked his job to do the right thing. And Marcus Richardson smiled. I think I'm ready to get back to the work that matters, he said. 3 weeks later, Maya Richardson walked into her English class. It was a different classroom now, with a different teacher. A young woman fresh from graduate school, hired specifically because of her commitment to inclusive pedagogy and her stellar recommendations from former students of all backgrounds. Maya had a seat in the front row. Not because she'd asked for accommodation, but because the new teacher assigned seats alphabetically and respected students' learning needs without making them justify basic fairness. The class was discussing Toni Morrison's Beloved. Maya raised her hand. Yes, Maya, the teacher said, smiling. I have a thought about the symbolism of water in this section, Maya began, and then she shared her analysis. It was sophisticated and thoughtful and drew connections the teacher hadn't considered. When she finished, the teacher looked genuinely delighted. That's brilliant, Maya. Can you say more about that? I'd love to hear you develop that idea. And Maya did. She talked about symbolism and trauma and memory and resistance. Other students joined in, building on her ideas, challenging them respectfully, creating the kind of rich discussion that should have been happening all along. After class, as students filed out, Maya stayed behind for a moment. Miss Bradley, she said to the new teacher. Yes, Maya? Thank you for listening. Always, Miss Bradley said. Your voice matters here. That evening, in the small apartment she shared with her father, Maya looked at her bedroom wall. Her original essay on James Baldwin, the one Mrs. Hendricks had crumpled, was now framed and hanging above her desk. Not crumpled anymore, but carefully smoothed out, preserved behind glass. A reminder of what she'd fought for and won. Next to it hung something new. A letter from Princeton University congratulating her on being selected as a rising scholar to watch, based on the recommendation of Mr. Davis and the essay she'd submitted about her experience fighting academic discrimination. Marcus walked by her room, saw her looking at the wall and stopped. He was wearing his construction clothes again. He'd kept that job but only part-time now. The rest of his week was spent consulting with Whitmore Academy and 2 other schools in the district, building systems to ensure what happened to Maya couldn't happen to other students. He'd found his way back to the law but on his own terms. Helping students, fighting for fairness, making his wife proud. "You did good, baby girl," he said. Maya turned, smiled. "We did good, Dad." And in that small apartment, in that moment, everything felt right. Not perfect, there would be more challenges, more fights, more moments when Maya would have to stand up for herself and others. But she was ready for them now. She knew her voice mattered. She knew her father had her back. She knew that justice, while not always instant, was always worth fighting for. Justice isn't always instant. But when it comes, it's worth the wait. Do you believe that standing up against injustice, even when it's scary, even when it seems impossible, is always worth it? Share your thoughts in the comments, because Maya's story proves that sometimes one person's courage can change everything.